Shalom, my name is Todd Bennett and I'm coming to you from under the Sukkah in Jerusalem, Israel. Today is day 1 of the Feast of Tabernacles, also known as Succot, and I just wanted to take an opportunity to share a little insight about Succot. This is a very special time that has real prophetic significance associated with it. When we look at Leviticus 23, which is one of the main texts associated with appointed times, one of the first things we recognize is that the weekly Shabbat is separated from the other appointed times. And we read about that in 23, 1 through 3. And then we move on to this break. We have a kind of a parenthesis which separates the weekly Shabbat from the other annual appointed times. And in that we read, "These are the Moadi of Yahuwah, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times." So we have kind of this front parenthesis, which then talks about the annual appointed times. Of course, the weekly Shabbat and the annual appointed times are different from one another because they're calculated in a different fashion. The weekly Shabbat, all we have to do is count days, 1 through 7, and we are at Shabbat, and then we start our count over again. The annual appointed times, we need to know how to determine months and days. That's why Genesis 1:14 tells us that the sun and the moon, the greater light and the lesser light, are made for Moadim, the appointed times. We have to be able to calculate not only months, but days in order to get to the specific times associated with the annual appointed times. So after 23:4, we read about the feast of the first month, read Passover and unleavened bread, and then we read about the feast of Shavuot, and then that brings us to Leviticus 23:22, where we have another separation. It says, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field. When you reap, nor shall you gather any gleanings from your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am Yahuwah your Elohim." So after the grain harvest, we're then given this provision for the poor and the foreigner, the stranger, that person that's not in covenant with Yahuwah. So that has very important prophetic significance when we look at the future, and even as we read in Revelation when it talks about the different harvests. And we'll talk about that in another teaching, but keep that in mind when you read these scriptures. You can't just always read through the entire text. You have to understand there's distinctions and separations that are built into them. So after the grain harvest, where we go from Passover and the barley to Shavuot and the wheat, now we have that break, the provision for the stranger, and after that we then move on to the appointed times of the 7th month, which begin on day 1 of month 7, which is Yom Teruah, the day of blasting. We then have Yom Kippur on day 10 of month 7, and then beginning on day 15 of month 7, we read about Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And it says, "Then Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of the 7th month shall be for the Feast of Tabernacles," for Sukkot, for 7 days to Yahuwah, okay? And that's important to distinguish, because then it says, "On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work." That's a kadosh mikra, set apart gathering. "For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahuwah." And during this time of Sukkot, there are actually 70 bulls that are slaughtered. And of course, 70 represents the nation. So we already saw that distinction between the grain harvest and provision was made for the stranger. And now we see when we get to Sukkot that there is actually, the nations are built into this. It appears to be a festival for the nations and of the nations. So, and that's a very interesting distinction that you have to understand when you're reading the book of Revelation. At first, we have the harvest of Yisrael. John said that the wheat harvest was the harvest of the Messiah, and so that grain harvest is for Yisrael, for the bride, and then we move on to the nations through Sukkot, and that's when others are brought into the covenant and brought into the kingdom. Now, then after that, it talks about an 8th day. It says, "On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, a kadosh mikra, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahuwah. It is a set-apart assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it." So we're already told the Sukkot 7 days, and then we have this set-apart day, the 8th day. And that's a separate feast, which most people don't recognize. Sukkot is 7 days. 8th day, Shemini Atzeret, is a separate feast, and there's real powerful prophetic significance associated with that. So after this now, we have a break. we have essentially the end bracket on the annual appointed times. We talked about that first bracket, which separated the weekly Sabbaths from the appointed times, and now we have an ending bracket in Leviticus 23:37. It says, "These are the Moedi of Yahuwah, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, Kadosh Mikra, to offer an offering made by fire to Yahuwah." So, see again, we have that bracket there. And then, very interestingly, we go back to Succot again. In Leviticus 23:39, it says, also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep the feast of Yahuwah for 7 days. On the first day there shall be a Sabbath rest, and on the 8th day a Sabbath rest. So again, distinctions here. We're celebrating these feasts of the 7th month. We've got Succot and then the 8th day. And so Succot begins with a solemn Sabbath rest, a high Sabbath. It ends on the 7th day, and then that's followed by the 8th day, which is a high Sabbath. And there's great prophetic significance with that. It then goes on to say that you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of the beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before Yahuwah your Elohim for 7 days. You shall keep it as a feast to Yahuwah for 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israel shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Yahuwah your Elohim. So, if we want to keep the Torah, that's what we do. And we've got palm branches, and we've got willow branches, and we've got myrtle branches, and we've got olive branches. We've got all these goodly branches from the fruit trees, and we rejoice. And the word for rejoice is samak. And a lot of times when we get to these feasts, you hear people say Hag Sameach, and of course they're saying have a rejoicing feast, have a joyful feast. And so we're commanded to rejoice during this time. And of course, we get the fruits, the pomegranates, and we get the etrog, and different fruits of the land. And we see the bounty that Yahuwah has provided us with. And of course, if you're not in the land, you can use this time to consider all the blessings that He's provided you with. And of course, that's what we're supposed to be doing. This is the culmination of the harvest season. It's called the Feast of Ingathering. This is when everybody's supposed to come in and recognize all the blessings that they've been provided with throughout the year, and simply rejoice. So we're given this great opportunity to recognize the blessings associated with serving Elohim and obeying His commandments. And the reason that Succot is provided a second time is because this is something that will have a future fulfillment. In fact, we read in Zechariah, and he talks about when the king reigns from Jerusalem, that the peoples of the nations are supposed to come up and celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, Succot. So this is something that's going to continue. This is an appointed time that's not going to be fulfilled until the very end, until He actually tabernacles with His people. And that's what we read about in the book of Revelation. We read about the harvest, the grain harvest, and then we read about the harvest during the fruit season when the grapes are thrown into the wine press. And then we long for that time after the millennial reign, when the New Jerusalem actually comes down and finally sets down on a renewed heaven and a renewed earth. And that will be the culmination of Succot. That will be the culmination of the land covenant that was made with Abram and Abraham. And that will be then the new beginnings associated with the covenant of the 8th day, the covenant of circumcision, when actually we see a fulfillment of this 8th day after Succot is fulfilled, after the 7 days of Succot are fulfilled. Then we enter into new beginnings, the freshness, the renewal of the renewed heavens, the renewed earth, and the renewal of the covenant on the 8th day. So that is the wonderful mystery that we have with this special appointed time of Succot. When we're commanded to rejoice, we rejoice not only in the present, but we rejoice in what we expect from the fulfillment of this incredible appointed time at a future time. So I wish you a joyful feast, and I pray that wherever you are in the world, that you will consider the blessings of the past, but also look forward to the rejoicing of the future when Messiah comes and rules and reigns and continues to fulfill and fill up this appointed time with great meaning. So for now, my name is Todd Bennett from Jerusalem. Hag Sameach.